Hey guys, we are back here today. We are presenting our Abzan Tortured Existence list. There are tons of really great primers and deck tech videos already on the web. I'm going to be listing a few of them in the description. I'm only going to be talking about my own list here. So, essentially, quick overview. Tortured Existence is the namesake of the deck. We pay 1 black for an enchantment that has pay 1 black, discard a creature card, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Very powerful ability in Pauper because it can be abused with cards like Golgari Brownscale that has Dredge. Dredge is the important part of this card. It has Dredge too, which means that whenever you would draw a card, you can instead put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard to return it to your hand. Golgari Brownscale also has the added bonus of gaining you 2 life when you do that. And essentially what that means is that you can return this at the beginning of your turn to have an activation from Tortured Existence guaranteed to be able to return anything in your graveyard, any creature from your graveyard to your hand. How do we abuse this? Well, essentially, we've got Spore Frog, which will completely stop combat damage forever, as long as we want. And with that single loop, we can basically ignore the board state and win from there. We've also got Crypt Rats here, which we can pay any amount of black mana we have in order to sweep the board away and deal damage to the opponent, eventually finishing the game that way with lots of life gain from the Golgari Brownscale and whatnot, maybe a couple attacks. It's, yeah, every game is really different with this deck, so that's the main general game plan, although every game pretty much plays out quite differently here. We've got another Dredger in Stinkweed Imp. I've only got 2 of them because it has Dredge 5. Although it does enable your graveyard very well, you can eventually mill yourself if you don't eventually get a Golgari Brownscale to go with that. It's also a great blocker, being a flyer and having almost Death Touch. It's only combat damage Death Touch, so very nice card. If I keep going here, I've got a Fume Spitter, a couple Fume Spitters here, very good against aggro decks, making their creatures smaller, and it also works very well against Delver and fairies and stuff like that. I like having those. Got a Carrion Feeder, goes great in the late game and will work very well with a couple of our sideboard cards. Lets us sacrifice any creatures that we don't need anymore to bring them back to the graveyard to eventually get them back, and it ends up being a very big beater. We've got a couple abundant growths here. It fixes our tricolor mana and draws us a card, which we can actually use as a Dredge ability as well, Dredge Enabler on our own turn. Spore Frog we've already spoken. We've got Kor Skyfisher here, which works very well with Abundant Growth, works well with the Ash Barrens, works well with Tilling Treefolk, works well with Gravesrabbler, can return any creature so that you can discard it to Tortured Existence. Just a really nice card to have in this deck. And it's also a nice 2/3 flyer for 2 mana. Very efficient. Thrull Surgeon. I've gotten owned by this card so many times playing Turbo Fog, so I'm playing it. It's a 2 mana 1/1. You get to pay 2 and sacrifice it to look at someone's hand and take any card from it. That includes lands, so very rare to see a card like this at all, even in Pauper of all places. So very sweet card to have. We got a couple Commune with the Gods. These let us search for our Tortured Existence or for a creature that we need, and puts everything else in the graveyard. So a very nice enabler, and lets us get our combo going very well. Satyr Wayfinder, another really very nice haymaker in this deck. Reveals the top 4 cards of our library. We take a land card from it if we have one. We put the rest in the graveyard. So good enabler in the early game. We've got, okay, talking about all these, Gravesrabbler, the main card advantage engine in this deck. Essentially, when you discard it to Tortured Existence, you get to pay an extra 2 to put it right into play and return an extra creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Really nice card. The White Splash essentially was for Kor Skyfisher, but also for Auramancer here. The Auramancer is really important for returning Tortured Existence, which we can search for by actually dredging our way to it if we need to. And getting it back with, say, like a Commune with the Gods, that we may have taken a creature instead or whatever, or it got countered or destroyed. Auramancer gets it back. You get it back to the Auramancer, you cast it, the Auramancer can die. If ever the Auramancer's in the graveyard and someone just tries to destroy your Tortured Existence, you can pay a black to return the Auramancer and loop it. So it makes it very hard to disrupt that way. And lastly, in the main deck, we've got a Krosan Tusker. You could They get to pay 3 to cycle it, which is the main feature here, to either activate a dredge, draw a card, and on top of it, search for a basic land. It also serves as a nice 6/5 beater for 7 mana in the late game, which is not out of the question here. Taking a look at the mana, we got 4 Ash Barrens, 4 Forests, Golgari Rot Farm, Jungle Hollow, Orzhov Basilica, 1 Plains, some Scoured Barrens, and some Swamps. Essentially, you want most of your mana to be able to make black mana because of the Tortured Existence activation requiring black, and for Crypt Rats, obviously. Moving on to the sideboard, we've got Deadweight, very good against aggro, particularly nice against Stompy because it makes their, pump spells less effective, and yeah, usually kills most of their creatures. You can't say go with the pump spell. Duress, very good against any control decks. Auger of Skulls, essentially, it could be a nice blocker if you need it to be, but the most important feature is that you can sacrifice it during your upkeep to have a player discard 2 cards. You can reuse it over and over again with Tortured Existence, so it's a very nice card advantage spell. Well, not really card advantage, but you know what I mean. And then we've got a Mesmeric Fiend, which works extremely well with Carrion Feeder. Essentially, with the Carrion Feeder, for those of you who don't know the trick, you have the Carrion Feeder in play, you play the Mesmeric Fiend, holding for priority, sacrifice the Mesmeric Fiend in response to its comes into play ability, which means that it goes to the graveyard. Its leaves play ability goes on the stack, on top of everything, resolves first, nothing happens. The Carrion Feeder gets a +1/+1 counter, and then you're left with its comes into play ability, which means that you get to exile an opponent's card from their hand permanently. Very cool ability here. An extra Spore Frog, not of the bone, gains you tons of life in this deck, and it even has flashback, so if ever it ends up in your graveyard for any reason, you get to reuse it again, so very nice. Battlefield Scrounger, very good card in control matchups. It has Threshold, which means you need to have 7 cards in your graveyard, which is not a problem for this deck, and essentially it says put 3 cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and he gets +3/+3 until end of turn. You can only activate it once each turn, but that is once on your turn and once on the opponent's turn. That makes six cards in a turn cycle, so that's a lot of cards, guys. And it's also a nice 6/6 beater, basically, and it also prevents you from getting milled in very, very long matches. So very, very cool card. We top it all off with Qasali Pridemage here. It has Exalted, 2/2 for 2, which means it's basically a Watch Wolf when it attacks by itself, but the most important part here is that you get to pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or enchantment, which means that we can, again, loop it with Tortured Existence to destroy as many artifacts and enchantments as we want, basically. So, very, very nice card. I think the non-white Tortured Existence decks usually run Caustic Caterpillar now. Before that it was Elvish Replica or Salvic Replica, one of those. And so we have access to white, so we have just a better card here. So that's Tortured Existence, guys. I'm going to be playing this for another couple of weeks. It's tons of fun. Once you get to that sweet late game, you really feel like you can't lose. It's great. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we will see you in the games.